Good afternoon, everyone. I am Jerry Candelario, Director of APAIT, a division of special service for groups. We aim to positively impact the quality of life for vulnerable communities impacted by mental health, housing insecurity, and HIV/AIDS. Tonight, we celebrate National Asian Pacific Islander Heritage Month, as well as National Mental Health Awareness Month, through our media advocacy campaign called My Wellness Journey Starts With Me. We will take a deep dive into discussing the intersections of mental health, HIV/AIDS, within the backdrop of the COVID-19 pandemic, as well as anti-Asian hate, with a dynamic panel of guests. To introduce our panelists, please join me in viewing the short video we developed during the peak of the pandemic, featuring the fabulous Margaret Cho.
Yay.
Hi, I'm Margaret Cho, and I'm here to talk to you about COVID-19 and its effect on our mental health. Since the beginning of the pandemic, we've gone through periods of lockdowns and have been isolated from many of our support systems, which in turn can be especially hard for people going through depression and other mental health disorders. The LGBTQ+ community are also especially vulnerable to the negative mental health consequences of the COVID-19 pandemic, as physical isolation may worsen feelings of social isolation and other chronic stressors relating to their identity. According to the National Alliance on Mental Health, the relapse and overdose rate has increased by 30% since March 2020. In addition, worries such as COVID-related stigma, homelessness, and unemployment are also contributing factors in the increase of our collective anxieties. If you find yourself struggling, feeling hopeless, or depending on alcohol or drugs to get through the day, don't be afraid to seek help. You don't have to deal with this on your own. Help is just one call away at APAIT or on the 24-hour NAMI helpline. Together, we will get through this.
Thank you. I also want to acknowledge that tonight's event is also co-hosted by the Los Angeles County Commission on HIV/AIDS, as well as the Orange County LGBTQ Together Towards Health Coalition. And tonight, I am excited to introduce our MC. Please welcome the Director of the University of Southern California's Bryce School of Public Policy and a member of APIT's Advisory Board, my friend, Dr. Lois Takahashi.
Yay. Thanks, Sherry. I actually don't run the Price School. I run the Price School in Sacramento, just so I don't get fired. So I'm just putting that out there for now. And it's my great pleasure to moderate this panel with these really wonderful people. You're gonna learn a lot about a whole bunch of things, but before we get to them, I want to introduce them to you. So let me start with Margaret Cho, who you just saw in that really amazing video about COVID. She's an accomplished performer in all formats. She could be called the queen of all media, having conquered the worlds of film, television, books, music, and theater. Throughout her career, she has received 5 Grammy Award nominations, including 2 for her most recent albums, Cho Dependent and American Myth. In 2017, Rolling Stone magazine named her one of 50 best stand-up comics, calling her the sort of funny, sex-positive feminist and LGBT activist younger comics continue to look up to. So welcome, Margaret Cho.
Yay, Margaret.
Thank you very much. Thank you. It's wonderful.
Alec Mapa.
Did she just
was
say
first discovered on Broadway.
Really?
I did. I'm
Alex?
sorry. That was my mistake.
Wow,
Alex.
that's an Asian on Asian hate crime right there.
I am completely guilty.
This is why I only do stuff for white people. Kidding.
I've already lost control of the session.
Okay.
So Alec appeared on Broadway in the Tony Award-winning production of M. Butterfly, for those of you who remember that. He guest starred on over 40 television series, including Alias, Friends, Roseanne, Seinfeld, and NYPD Blue. Alec played network television's very first gay Asian series regular on the CBS sitcom Some of My Best Friends. An accomplished stand-up comedian, Alex Wisecrack, that's really hard to say, Alex Wisecrack comedy special premiered on Logo in 2005 and has since become a cult favorite. He's a tireless fundraiser, and he has toured the country on behalf of the Human Rights Campaign and the Matthew Shepard Foundation, earning him the unofficial title of America's Gaysian Sweetheart. Welcome, Alec.
It's all for you, Damien.
And finally, Rain Valdez, not last but not least. She just received her first Primetime Emmy nomination
Get it, Rain?
for Outstanding Actress in a Short Form Comedy or Drama Series for her lead role in Raise Her Tongue, which she created, crowdfunded, and produced. Congratulations on that. That's amazing. Rain is the second transgender actress to ever be nominated for a Primetime Emmy in an acting category, and the first Filipino-American transgender actress to be nominated. She's also the founder of Act Now, the first and only acting class in Los Angeles prioritizing a safe space for LGBTQIA actors, and teaches beyond the binary. She got her start playing Coco in season 2 of TV Land's Lopez, and doubling in Amazon's Transparent as Miss Van Nuys on screen and a producer behind the scenes. So welcome, Rain Valdez.
Yay, Rain.
Hey, hi.
Hi, Margaret. Hi, Alec.
Hi.
Sweetheart.
So let me get to the questions, and let me start first with Margaret Cho. I'm going to ask all of you these questions, but I'm going to start first with Margaret Cho. What have you learned since the beginning of the pandemic, and were there any positives that came from it?
I think what I've learned is to really treasure all of the people in my life, all of the joyful experiences that I get to have, you know, and even like the small things that I would take for granted, like going to the movies or going out to eat. And, you know, it's more that I really understand how precious our time is and how precious our connections are. And these things about the arts, I really miss the theater. I really miss music. I really miss comedy, and I miss going to museums, and how much of my life is really about that. And so what is a benefit is that I've been able to stay home and really kind of just get into my home life, which as a comedian, I have never really spent any time at home. And so this is like it's been a nice opportunity to get to know my own environment and to be with my animals. So, but you know, mostly the whole year has taught me how to be grateful for things that I think I would take for granted before.
Great, thank you, Margaret. Alec, what would you say that you learned from all of this? And I know that there have been positives and negatives. So
Oh yeah,
maybe
no,
talk about
I'm a
both of those things.
Cancerian, so I'm always home. I'm everybody's mom. I'm always home. I'm always cooking. That's the kind of bitch I am. But it's made me appreciate that more. Just my home. I mean, as an actor, I'm always out of work. So I'm always separated from the things that I feel define me, right? And the one positive I got out of pandemic was we're not out of work. Your worth as a human being, as an individual, is immutable. It doesn't change whether or not you have a job. It doesn't change whether or not you are involved. Do you know what I mean? It's like even in isolation, I think we've all kind of lost perspective on our intrinsic value on who you are. I mean, I remember at the beginning of the pandemic, everybody was trying to write a screenplay or make sourdough or whatever bullshit they were up to. And it's kind of like, you don't need to do these things in isolation in order to feel extraordinary. You're extraordinary to begin with. Negatives, I've become more agoraphobic. Like there better be, if you're inviting me someplace, there better be food and fun for me to be worth it. But I'm forcing myself to go beyond my comfort zone at this point.
And Alec, maybe you could talk a little bit about raising a teenager in this sort of atmosphere.
Yeah. Well, do you have kids?
I do not.
Oh, well, I have a 16-year-old, and that is the age where they differentiate. I feel like I'm not in any light at all. I've done this all wrong, and as a gay man, I gotta hand in my card. This is the age where they differentiate. They have to separate from us in order to be independent human beings. And when I was 16 years old and growing up in San Francisco, I was running around all over the place. Now he's 16 and he's running all over the world on his computer. And it's a whole different reality. That's how they socialize. That's how they play games. That's how they find fellowship with each other. Kids these age, the kids. So it's been actually really, really good for him. You know, but he's ready. He starts summer school in next week, and he's really looking forward to it.
Yeah, I'm sure. I'm sure.
Yeah.
And Ray Valdez, sort of what are the things that you take away from this pandemic, which we're still kind of in, but we're sort of starting to move out? What are the big lessons for you?
Yeah, I mean, I experienced a lot of what Margaret and Alec have expressed, a lot of gratitude. I also really loved realizing that, even without all of these identities that we get so attached to, I was really attached to being an actor, a transgender community advocate. I had all these identities that I was associated with. So I was kind of all over the place, um, traveling a lot and speaking on behalf of my community. And when all that was taken away, I got to know myself and really experience what solitude looks like for me. And I actually realized that I actually like who I am, regardless of, those identities. And I got to really appreciate, um, my own sensibilities and my own humor and my own quietness and my own peace and nobody judging me for, um, you know, not having very much to say or having too much to say. And I also really learned to appreciate nature more, which is something that I never really saw, to be honest, for quite some time. And when I go on walks with my dogs, it's, I'm so drawn to the trees around me and the plants and my neighbors' gardens. And, I got to a point where I was hoping that no one would think I was like spying on them because I would just stare at people's gardens trying to figure out what they had. And now I have my own garden. Now I've been working on my backyard and just filling it with life. And yeah, so I've just really learned to just be a person again, I think. And it's really amazing. The negative stuff, of course, I miss my friends and I miss my family. But I also, wanted to take this very seriously and make sure that my family were safe. And so,
Mhm, mhm. Well, that kind of brings me to the next question, which I'll start with Alec.
Oh,
We talk a lot about, I heard a lot about pets and, refining yourself and thinking about touching nature and these different sorts of strategies that you use. How did you, if you think about it, what were the things that you did to tend to your mental health?
well, I do have a mental health podcast that's on every week, and everybody's welcome to join. And it's called Alec Mapa Hot Mess with Matthew Dempsey, psychotherapist, and I started it to kind of destigmatize talking about mental health. And I did that because culturally, as a Filipino person, I was raised to think that therapy and meds were what you did when you were weak. My parents, they were war survivors of World War II. So you really can't compete with that. It's kind of like, I'm depressed. Really? Well, the Japanese bombed our village. And you can't really, you know what I mean? So I suffered with depression for years, chemical depression. And I didn't do anything about it because I was embarrassed. And then I found out that when I got help, which was the hardest thing for me to do, Asians, you got to ask for help. It's not weakness. That is strength. When you're strong enough to kind of advocate for yourself and take the risk to extend yourself and ask for help when you need it, that's what you need to do. So I did it. I got meds. I got better. But for me, mental health is all about like what are the goodies I need to get through the day. And at the beginning of the pandemic, I needed to feel useful. I didn't like not feeling useful. So I did a lot of fundraisers at the very beginning to help nurses because, again, I'm Filipino, so nurses mean a lot to me. So I did fundraisers online. I believe Margaret did it at one point, where I raised money to feed nurses who were the first responders, and that kind of kept my self esteem up for a little bit. but it's really important for my mental health to always feel like I'm contributing somehow. But again, I talk about mental health every week on my podcast. Look it up. I'm a hot mess with Alec Mapa. And
And we'll try to put that in the chat box.
yeah, you hear from all of your favorites in the
Um,
community.
I'm gonna add it to my listening queue because I listen to
Thank you.
podcasts on my walks all the time. So.
Yeah, well, I want to have you both on. I was on Margaret's podcast. I was telling Margaret
Yes.
when we started the show. You were the
Yeah.
last person. You were the last house I ventured into before COVID. Yeah. Isn't that crazy?
Feels like a long time ago now.
It does. It does. It feels like ages ago.
Yeah.
Well, Margaret, I mean, you made that wonderful video for APAT and NAMI, and it sounds like you're doing similar things in terms of podcasts and sort of trying to reach out to people about gaining access to mental health services. What are the things?
It's really important. Yeah. It's really important. I mean, my family has a long history of mental illness that has never been addressed until my generation. And so I definitely take a lot of time and effort to correct that. I've had many, many years of therapy, and now I have a very strong meditation practice, a very strong just like a program that's kind of like put together over years of living with mental illness. And I finally kind of cracked that code, but it's really important to figure out what you need and get that help, because for so long, Asians were not able to do that. My family was not able to do that. And, therefore, like kind of just really suffered in silence for many generations. And so I'm really encouraging other people to seek what they need and ask for what they need, as it's really, really important.
How do you talk to people who have never done this, which there's a lot of folks in the Asian community, Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders, who have not sought mental health services or resources? What would you say to them to take that first step?
Well, I mean, I think that if you really address it in the same way that physical health is such an important quality to have, and to really treasure that, and the brain is just a part of that. It's like there's no separation between your brain and the rest of your body, and your mental state of being is just as important as any other degree of wellness. And so if they would look to all of these systems being in a good place, then I think, we take a lot of the stigma away. You don't personalize it as much as, thinking that we're failing somehow at living because we need assistance with mental health.
Right. I'd like to add to that with Margaret.
Yeah.
You said for years your people in your family had mental health issues, and my parents survived a war, and my grandmother did too, and I grew up with all of them in the house, and they all had PTSD. They all had triggers. They all had anxiety. They all had depression, and they could have used help, but my parents' generation didn't do that. And so in talking to people who are reluctant to discuss their mental health, I'm like, you don't hesitate to get your teeth done at the dentist. You don't hesitate to get your eyes checked. If you think of your brain in a really impersonal way, it's just the hard drive, and you're neglecting the hard drive, and it runs everything. You would just want to keep yourself in running condition. And that's, if you look at mental health as part of that rubric in a really kind of clinical way, it tends to take it away. Because my Filipino parents, it was like, why are you in therapy? You're not crazy. It's like, oh, I have to be crazy to go to therapy. It's like, no, you don't have to be sick to feel better.
No, that's really, really important, to trying to think ways to message so that it makes sense to people that they're not doing something that's bad. And let me turn to Rain. So you kind of started us off talking about our mental health and how we take care of ourselves. And you talked about your garden and nature and your dog. I mean, how else do you think about mental health, and how you've both changed your ways that you deal with mental health, but also kind of new lessons that you have for yourself and other people about how to better cope?
Yeah, similarly to what Margaret and Alec have been saying, as a Filipino American immigrant, the generation before me suffered so much, sacrificed so much, and there's a lot of fears associated to going to the doctor. My mom passed away in 2009 from uterine cancer, And you know, we found out when it was stage 4.
Oh
She was
no.
she was at a point where she couldn't handle the pain anymore, and she was trying to manage it on her own, and just couldn't handle it anymore. So she had to be we had to call 911 and get her to the hospital. And by the time we were there, it was stage 4, and there wasn't much that they could do. And so that was a huge lesson for me in terms of unpacking the trauma and breaking down the fears associated to um, physical health and our mental health, because like Alec was saying, it's perceived as weakness if we go to the doctor or if we seek a therapist. And so, and I've actually been doing a lot of mental health work through plant medicine, through psilocybin, which is a type of mushrooms.
Mm.
And what I've been uncovering is just a part of me is when I'm in it there. It's hard. It's really hard to describe, but something happens to you where it, the plant medicine breaks down the ego, so you're able to really uncover the things that you that your body and that your mind hides from you because you're protecting yourself. And so once you break that down, you're able to see the real issues of your trauma, the root of your trauma and the root of your pain, and actually are able to deal with it. And learning that through plant medicine. We are the most precious things that our ancestors left behind. And in a way, we are their hopes and dreams actualized. And so for me, it's become so much more important to stop the cycle of suffering and stop the cycle of the many types of sacrifices that are so um, that are so traumatizing and so painful, and start having conversations about healing and about um, the things that prevent us from being truly who we are, and also breaking cultural ideas and stigmas that aren't really serving us and just is keeping us apart from each other. It's keeping us separate from one another, and it's keeping us from really addressing, you know, um, the issues and past traumas and inherent traumas as well. Um, and so for me, I feel like if I can do it with me, if I can break the cycle with me, maybe you know the generation after me, or if I end up having children one day, that they wouldn't have to carry so much of this pain and this trauma, and be free from all of these um, uh, the things that create the mental blockages and whatnot.
No, that's very helpful to understand your process and to think about. I really like this idea of projecting ourselves as actualizations of hope. That's a very positive way of thinking about our legacies. So thank you for sharing that. Let me turn right into this broader issue about, you're all in the entertainment industry. There are ourselves and how we deal with all the legacies of our cultures and our families, but then you're all dealing with all this stuff going on in Hollywood and the entertainment industry more generally. So Rain, let me start with you. How have you dealt with the positive or negative intersections of race, gender, and sexuality in the work that you have done?
Well, gosh, it's still a challenge. I'm still in the midst of it all. I'm still being discriminated because of my gender identity. I'm still not considered, um, you know, a bankable actor because I'm Asian American or whatever. I don't know what the reasons are to be quite honest, but I still struggle with those things, and I think we're at a point where the industry is very well aware that Asian Americans are underrepresented and undervalued, but I'm trying to get them to understand as well how underestimated that we are, and how that for a long time there's a consistency with the power dynamics of treating Asian Americans as if we're you know, I said this the other day. You know, when I walk into a space or on set, you know, I walk in with a lot of gratitude. And what I'm noticing sometimes is that the gratitude that I come with becomes an expectancy. And so then when I speak my mind or say something about a line or a script or something, it comes across as discontentment, or, you know, me being a diva or me not being grateful. And I'm realizing that, like, sometimes I'm like, no, I'm grateful, but just because I'm grateful, that doesn't mean I'm content with how I'm being treated or how I'm being perceived. So how do we open that dialogue so that this character has the amount of care of someone who actually lives that life authentically? And so it's having those really tough conversations, and you know, when people hire me, they're very quick to pat themselves on the back because we hired Rain Valdez. She's trans and she's Asian American. Let's pat ourselves on the back. They're very quick to want to do that, but you know, but then I show up and I say, hey, well, what about this and what about that? And you know, they're a little bit like, oh, you know,
It talks.
It it talks. And so for me, it's like, how do I show these people that we do have a voice and that we do talk? And so when I made Razor Tongue, which earned me my Emmy nomination, it's completely the opposite of what this industry expects of an Asian American transgender woman, right? She actually talks and she has a voice, and it's a very strong, prominent, culturally relevant voice that represents not only women, but an entire group of people that are continually experiencing discrimination and misogyny in their workplaces. And so yeah, it's a challenge, and I don't know that this industry knows what to do with it yet. That we talk, I don't know that they know what to do with it yet. And so for me, it's like I just have to keep showing them that, you know, that I'm just as valuable and just as, you know, deserving as they are.
Thank you for sharing all of that. That's really important. Can I turn to Margaret Cho? And you know, you've gotten a lot of accolades. You know, we were talking before this the discussion started about your new movie, and so how is it for you now, dealing with all this intersection of race, gender, and sexuality?
Well, I just like to see more. I want to see more of our stories out there. I want to see more creators out there. It's just like, you know, even though we're getting more of a kind of a representation within kind of mainstream media, we still have a real problem with queerness, with gender, with trans community, with so many parts of our kind of identity that really aren't shown. So and you know, it's like also getting past the idea of identity too. Like, can we just share stories that maybe don't have anything to do with our identity, which is a very, like, that's a bold thing for anybody to think. Like, what do you mean that you wouldn't just share about being Asian and queer? Like, but there's so much more. I mean, those are just sort of like the kind of broad statements of who we are, but they're not the story. They're not the whole story.
Mhm.
And, you know, I've been watching white people's stories for so long,
So
and
long.
they're allowed to have stories and
Yeah.
tell stories, whereas we just have to introduce ourselves over and over and over. So there's more to the story than our identity. That's what I would like to see.
And you know, is it all always about making our own stuff? I mean, so Rain
Well,
is.
can I add to that? Because
Yeah, yeah, of course.
Margaret and Rain are perfect examples of people who've like taken control of their narrative. And that's when they've been the most successful. Rain is a producer and an actor. Margaret is an amazing writer and performer. And if we only did what they handed us, we wouldn't do anything. Margaret wouldn't be where she is. Rain's story would be incomplete. If I didn't write, you know, I wrote my special, Showtime special, Alec Mapa Baby Daddy, because I wanted to talk about my foster adoption journey. Nobody's there. There's not a bunch of white people in a room coming up with stuff for us to do. But what I am finding now, culturally, there is a need among writers and producers to get it right. And Rain, you mentioned something about, you know, they pat themselves on the back. They think that just hiring you is enough. But I do find that they don't want to be the people that get it wrong. They don't, because the way of social media is now, people can come down on stuff really, really fast. I'm finding now that our voices, I mean, I've been in this business since 1985. I'm almost 60 years old. I'm 56. I'm going to be 56 in July. I got microneedled yesterday. Um, and I started out in this business playing a lot of parts because I fit the costume. You know, Vietnamese science student, Filipino grocery clerk, graduating to speaking parts, and then I just did a pilot with Kelsey Grammer and Alec Baldwin, where I was like the third series regular on the show. So it's kind of like we're at a point, as much as othered as we feel right now, as othered as we feel as queer people, as people of color, as women, as trans people, there is a definite need for our voice, you know, in getting it right. It's like, okay, you want to tell this story, you're gonna need me, you're gonna need Rain, you're gonna need Margaret to come correctly. And I feel like there's more of an effort that's been my experience this year.
And I mean, how do you accelerate that opening up of opportunity? Margaret, I mean, you've been through a lot of things, and I mean, creating your own product is one way. I mean, how else do you accelerate people's opening up of other experience so that there are these opportunities?
I think it's really just being vocal about it and just being very encouraging of newer creators, being very supportive of each other's projects, which we all are. So I think that's kind of part of it. And if there's an easier way to do it now with the way that social media is, where you can get behind different projects, and that's really incredible. So, you know, there's definitely ways, and I'm always really impressed by the younger generation of people who are really innovating and doing new things. And really, like, I'm so into Bella Porch. She's an incredible Filipino American from the Philippines who is the biggest TikTok star. And to harness new media that way, and to have like launched a music career where she has had like 100 million views on her music video in a week. It's powerful. So these young people they're really doing incredible work.
And how do we, I mean, the Lindas have been going viral.
Yeah.
Punk rock stuff
sound. Oh, beautiful.
Which has been really amazing.
Yeah.
Is it chance? I mean, how do we have any kind of insights, and I'll ask Rain this, about how to harness this energy in ways that are going to get viral, like the Lindas?
They're doing it. It's the excellence. It's the thoughtfulness. It's the platform. It's the moment. You know, they're really doing it themselves.
And this generation's different in that they don't have any of the hesitancy of my generation. I was like, I'm gay and I think I might be bi, or I was like, tiptoeing out of my Catholic Filipino household into my queerdom gingerly. My son's 16 years old and their whole group is like, I'm trans, I'm pan. These are my pronouns. They have none of the baggage that I did, speaking personally, none of the baggage that I did, none of the shame, none of they're anxious about completely other things because their whole lives are online now. But in terms of we've had an entire generation of teenagers who were stuck home for 18 months during Black Lives Matter, during the George Floyd murder a year ago. And there's a consciousness that this generation has that my generation did not have.
And Rain, speaking, you have these other kinds of experiences being an immigrant and other things. I mean, how's that kind of played a role in how you're thinking about all these things we're talking about in terms of opening up ways for more voices and more stories and, what are the opportunities?
Yeah, I think I really pride myself on being community built. I've been fortunate enough to surround myself with people who are like me and want to create and build on the space that was trailblazed before us. And we've been doing that. And Razor Tongue wouldn't have happened if it weren't for my community. And I think the shift in what we're seeing in Hollywood is that, in a way, we're kind of birthing a new Hollywood. It's really ugly. It's really painful. It's really messy. It's a little bloody. You know what I mean? It's just like it's super messy. But that's what we're feeling right now. But I think, well, I'm hoping that after the birthing process, we'll get to an age where it's completely unapologetically inclusive and diverse, and more of us in the decision-making spaces and power. Because I think that's what's been lacking for me, is that I'm still relying upon people to green light me, my projects or my talent or my shows. And it's really an unfortunate position to be in, because it makes you really see where you fit in the industry, and it makes you really see the power dynamics and all the hurdles that you have to go through. And I think what's also been very revealing is that the people on the other side, that the gatekeepers, they don't really know what they're doing. They don't really know what they want.
Don't know what they're doing.
they don't. And so, I hope that with this new birthing, that we're able to get past the gatekeepers and really start creating space so that we can, like I said, as a community, start building again and creating the kind of Hollywood that's nuanced and has a tremendous amount of viewpoints and voices. Because like Alec was saying earlier, my voice is different from Margaret's, and we have different experiences, but we're still within the same communities. We're not, one story doesn't serve all. So like, while Pose on FX is great, it's not representative of the entire trans queer community. And this industry is very quick to, oh, well, we already have that, as opposed to recognizing the differences and the nuance in each of our stories. And I'm hoping that that's where we'll get to after the birthing process.
Yeah, and transformation is always hard. We know that. So thanks for pointing that out to us too. And Margaret, I mean, maybe I'll sort of get your sense about, you watch the industry, and I'll get to Alec about this too, shift and change and maybe transform. I mean, what more needs to happen for you to think, oh, this is actually, going to change the future of what we're doing?
I think a lot more still needs to happen. I mean, I think we're just at the beginning of it. And now we have the the cis white male backlash, the cis straight white male backlash of like, oh, we're not even going to be able to talk. Like the worst thing that you can be is cis, straight, white, and male. And it's like now they're completely, which is so funny.
Yeah.
Like, why are you thinking they're like they're going to put us in a zoo?
What's gonna happen to you?
I know they're
Yeah.
like so upset, which I
Yeah.
think is really funny, and I think it's really. It's like nothing's happened really. Nothing's happened. We've had a couple of more Asian American celebrities, a couple of more Black American projects. We've had a couple of like more gay moments. Like nothing's going on.
They're
And
really
I feel like everything's being turned upside down.
they're really
Yeah.
victimizing themselves.
Yeah.
I mean, it's the thing of like, it's the caste system. You know, this is
Yeah.
it's the caste system, and straight white men are at the very, very top of it, and they've been the dominant caste. So if you're socialized that way, it's really of this thing of like, you know, what I all of a sudden I can't say whatever I want. All of a
Right.
sudden I can't say this, I can't do that. It's like, no, all of a sudden you can't be a dick. It's not cool for you to be a dick anymore. It's not cool for you to be uninformed, ignorant, uneducated, insensitive, have no empathy for anybody other than yourself. That's not cool anymore. And I think, you know, at 4 years of Trump, we saw the nadir of that. We saw the absolute embodiment of that right before our eyes, and how toxic that is, and how toxic white supremacy is. You know, and that's really what this is all about. You know, it's kind of like what Rain said is very true, that we're not the gatekeepers yet. And where I would feel a real sea change is if I do a sitcom and all the writers come to the run through and it's not all white guys. Great white guys, really funny white guys, but that's only one color in the paint box that you're using. It's only one set of experiences. How much richer would that be if the voices were varied? And like Rain said, it, I'll feel different. I mean, it's getting better, and I'm not going to poo-poo anything. I'm working. I have a nice house. It'll change when there's more of us producing and more of us in the decision-making seats. When there's a big sea change at ABC, because Channing Dungey was she was the first African American female network head, and that changed everything. So when there's an Asian person at the head of a network, at the head of a that consciousness informs everything on the way down.
I'm going to have to transition now. So I'm going to ask Jerry Candelario to come back, and he's going to introduce one of the early campaigns that APIT did to try to change some of these things that you're talking about. So Jerry, would you like to come back and introduce our special guest?
All right. Well, this is such an enlightening conversation, everyone. Thank you so much. We're midpoint. So I am introducing, of all things, our section on sex and sexuality and gender representation. And, for many years, EPIT really has been at the forefront of doing a lot of innovative things, particularly around Asian and HIV/AIDS and sexuality. And we were really proud of this campaign. I'm going to kind of bring this back to memory lane, and then circle us back to what Alec has joined us recently with our Status is Sexy campaign, which he was one of our brand ambassadors. But back in the I know, believe it or not, Alec, right? I'm gonna introduce Keith Kasai. He was part of our Love Your Asian Body campaign that we did back in the 90s. And we're actually gonna show a clip of that really amazing advocacy campaign. So I think it's gonna pop up right now. Right here, Love Your Asian Body. It was our HIV testing campaign. This was literally in the early days of the epidemic.
Wow.
And Alec at that time was actually one of our amazing fundraisers, during Dean Goishi's time. Remember that, Alec?
I do.
Director. So imagine this campaign in the 90s, and then reaching out, getting this to the mainstream Asian Pacific Islander community, and just how the backlash that we faced. But Keith who is one of the original models, and he can probably point out for himself who he was. Keith, what was it like, this campaign, when you were running it and you were part of this really controversial but really innovative campaign?
Well, when they asked me to participate in it, I was a little nervous, not knowing exactly where the cards were going to go. But, I was happy that I could help in this campaign. It being on the cards, it not only did it assume that people might think that I was gay, but also that I might also have AIDS, which was true, though. I tested positive for HIV early in 1985. So I was like 20, I think 24 when I became HIV positive. And living in Hawaii, where I'm from, it was hard to be out and open. And at that time, it was just really scary to be out. But I wanted to do something for our community. So I agreed to do it. And, I was happy that, these cards went out to all of the, places where APIs hung out at. And unfortunately, a lot of people were afraid to take the cards, and a lot of APIs lived at home and they didn't want their parents to see the cards on them. But I think overall, the campaign was so effective in reaching the community so that people could see that, to put the face on HIV, that APIs can, and it's possible to get it. It's not, a disease that only hits one community, it hits all communities.
Absolutely. Keith, I think this is, again, in the beginning stages of the epidemic, particularly in the Asian community, right? This is why organizations like APIT got started. It's because many of our gay Asian friends basically died alone from AIDS during that time. And APIT got started because of that. And this is, again, an attempt on that, really raising the visibility that we are sexual beings, right? And, I'm curious to know how you think, because, back then we didn't have social media like we have now, right? This video, this photo right here, this was like a card that we passed out in our outreach activities. We went clubs to bathhouses. Yeah, believe it or not, back in the day, I was an outreach worker. It was one of my early jobs at APAIT, going around and passing out, condoms and such. So how do you think a campaign like this would look like today, and how the reception would be? And I also want to ask, for everybody else in the panel, what your experiences are now, what your thoughts are actually. So we'll maybe start with Keith. Like a campaign like this, how would it gel now compared to, in the early 90s?
I think the outreach was so important because for a lot of people, they didn't know where to get the help. They didn't have any means of figuring out where to get tested. What do they do when they get tested, afterwards? And then how do you get through the whole process of getting medical attention or mental health assistance? Maybe in doing it in different languages, that helps, But this was so early in the beginning that we were just pretty much, it was an experiment of how to get to people, how do I get to our brothers and sisters in the API community? And, I think it was really successful as far as what we did at that time, and now with social media, you're right, but the whole key was putting a face on it, being visible. I think those are really important things.
Absolutely. Alec, any reaction? I don't know if you even saw this campaign or not, but I think you're on mute.
Myself. First of all, I'm furious that I wasn't asked to model campaign, because I was snatched back in the 90s, and I would have also handed out condoms and cards easily. It's making me think about, I remember APAIT, one of the things they were the first to do is also offer HIV/AIDS information in the languages that people spoke, in Tagalog, in Vietnamese, in Mandarin. And that was like a brand new conversation, not just the sexual conversation, but talking about sex to Asian people. And I find what this is making me think is until somebody does it, you think it's going to be a bigger deal than it is, right? Like this is like you would not believe this, but this was super provocative in 90. What are we talking? Circa
1990.
91.
91. This is pretty hot stuff for 1991. I mean, we're still not featured sexually a lot as queer Asian men. You know, it's like, again, there's that caste system.
Yeah,
And you know, a big part of my stand-up and my political voice is talking about fucking and talking about Asian people having sex and talking about gay Asian guys having sex, a lot of sex, because we're kind of almost, well, when I first started out, kind of socially excluded from that conversation.
absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I hear you. And Margaret, you've done a lot of talk about sex in your routine. What are your thoughts?
Yes, I love this. It really reminds me of Gappa, who I did a lot of
Yes.
work with over the
Yeah.
years. And, you know, we needed this. We needed this campaign. It's so, you know, I think it's just so positive for who we are to see ourselves in this manner, and also to know, like, that AIDS was not a white disease. There was this myth that it was only killing gay white men, and that is really not true at all. You know, there was so much ideas of around the disease that really didn't serve us at all. And, you know, we lost so many people during that time, mostly because of also just the fear around it, and also thinking that we didn't apply to this particular
Mm-hmm.
disease, or somehow it didn't affect us, where it absolutely did. And so, you know, this campaign is like really important, but it really reminds me of a really very important time of activism. I think that a lot of us are very resilient through the pandemic now because we've been through a pandemic, which was AIDS. You know, to survive AIDS was really to survive our first pandemic. And so we kind of knew how to approach this one. In fact, a lot of the violence against Asian Americans, AAPIs now reminds me of the violence against gay people during AIDS. You know, where people were using the disease as an excuse to act out on their already discriminated points of view. So it's like it's a very sad reminder, but this is a wonderful, joyful thing of what we were and what we still are.
Absolutely. And I'm so glad, Margaret, you actually brought up, you know, there is sort of, I think, a correlation, right, between the COVID-19 pandemic and the AIDS epidemic. So I'm curious to know from all of you, maybe we can start with Keith. You know, is there a correlation, right, between AIDS pandemic or the AIDS epidemic and the current COVID-19 pandemic that we're experiencing?
Well, I mean, when COVID happened, there was no information like how AIDS came out. And then when it did come out, there was that fear and hysteria. You know, it was the same thing where, you know, everybody was afraid to get it. We didn't know how we got it. And then what happened was when people found out where it came from, they blamed one particular part of the community. And it's like how when AIDS came out, they blamed the gay community. So there is that that came with the COVID.
Absolutely, absolutely. And Rain, you know, we were part of a campaign to actually try to get trans folks in particular to get vaccinated. And in the beginning stages of you know, trying to get the campaign out for vaccines, we had a really hard time getting our trans clients, our trans consumers to get vaccinated because of a lot of kind of these mistrust, you know, within government and the medical community, particularly the trans community. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, you know, it's such a personal thing. The vaccination. It's everyone. You know, I don't judge, and I believe that everyone has a right to their bodies, and can make decisions for themselves. I do believe that. But what I love about people who take this seriously is that that there's an acknowledgement of the amount of lives that were lost, and that there's an acknowledgement that we have a part in community and we have a part in our survival, right? Just like all the animals in the oceans and in the jungle have a part in order to sustain our ecosystem. And so for me, it was important that I got vaccinated, and I am, and because I didn't want to risk harming a loved one who, my baby sister has, she's diabetic, so she's one of those people who are considered a risk for COVID. And so, you know, it's a tough conversation to have, but like, I just like my part in taking care of the people that I love is also, being safe and making sure that I don't get it and pass it on, by mistake or accidentally. And so I think it's a personal choice, and everyone is entitled to make their decisions. But I think we have to, at a certain point, which has happened to a lot of people with COVID, is that we've realized that no matter how privileged we are, or no matter how fortunate we are, we're just as vulnerable as as our neighbor. And in order to sort of really be a part of society and the our communities, I think we really have to acknowledge and go back in time, go past this individualist society that we've become, and really start taking care of each other.
Absolutely. Very nice thoughts indeed. Alec and Keith, actually, a question for you. And maybe Keith, you can answer this specifically. How has it been? Because I know in our work here at APIT, we've had to pivot, during COVID-19, not just in addressing HIV, but, also HIV and COVID, right? Like, so there was a lot of misinformation around, like, if you're HIV positive, you shouldn't get the vaccine because you might be at risk. So we had to deal with a lot of like psychoeducation and really myths around that. Folks thinking that you could get sterile if you get the vaccine, for instance. So this kind of like ongoing like myth and how to get folks to, and change their mindset. And again, I absolutely agree with Rain's point that you have to respect it's like an individual decision, right? So Keith, what are your thoughts on that?
I got tested early with HIV because I wanted to be responsible. And it's the same thing with getting the shot. I mean, I think I got the shot right away, not even thinking about myself, but because my parents still live in Hawaii. My mother is going through some medical treatment for cancer, and I didn't want to take a chance on bringing something home. And so, there's things that I can do also. I mean, just having the information, getting tested, or taking care of yourself so that you can also be conscious and caring for somebody else. And I think that was the reason why I didn't think about the whole sterility thing myself, because I just wanted to make sure that I did my part.
What, were you going to impregnate somebody anytime soon? Was that on the agenda?
That's right.
Sterilize me.
Right? My goodness. Well, I think I want to circle back to what Margaret had spoken about, the correlation actually with, the COVID pandemic and how the last administration really vilified the Asian community, right? By calling it for, oh my gosh, I mean,
The Wuhan flu, the Kung flu.
yeah, all of that. And I mean, to this very day, by the way, I never say that man's name.
Yeah.
You know, just because.
So, you know, all these hate crimes are just an arm of white supremacy. Do you know what I mean? It's a dog whistle that people unfortunately responded to. And, you know, people, I have a lot of friends in San Francisco and, you know, people who are on the ground and seeing it happen. And sensitive subject was the amount of hate crimes that were committed by African Americans. That kind of like there was an anti-Asian sentiment there, and that's, to me, that's still, it's another arm of white supremacy. You have somebody whipping up your resentments at all times, and it's also an unfortunate lapse in education, because if African Americans knew how much we were discriminated against right alongside to them. My father's generation couldn't drive in a car with a white woman without the cops pulling him over, beating the shit out of him. One of the biggest lynchings of Asian American men happened here in California. Was, I can't even remember the number, but it's kind of like they were lynching Chinese people during the railroad time. They were like, you know, the Chinese Exclusion Act. So I'm not saying that the levels of discrimination are the same, but there's a parallel experience that binds the Black and Asian community in ways that we don't even remember anymore. That makes sense?
Absolutely, absolutely. And you know, I'm actually really grateful that, you know, we do have some groups out there that have come up, right, that form like this Black Asian solidarity during the whole Black Lives Matter and then the anti-Asian hate, you know, and I think those are some forms that I've been able to just feel, you know, I'm able to support and help, right? The intersectionality of you know, some of our struggles.
Yep.
So I'm curious to know from all of you, you know, just not just within the pandemic, but you know, with all of the increase in anti-Asian hate, how did you all cope? You know, because those were really difficult times, particularly watching, you know, elderly Asian
It's the worst.
bloodied.
Yeah.
I mean, that was just horrific.
Yeah.
So, Margaret, what have you been?
Well, I think the way that I always handle my anxieties and fears is really putting them into action, with whether it's fundraising, whether it's awareness, whether it's going back into history and looking at the cyclical nature of these hate crimes against Asians that have been happening since 1849. And the largest lynching happened in Chinatown in 1871 in Los Angeles, which was, the numbers vary, but between 16 and 19 Chinese men were murdered. And the reverberations, there were almost 200 Chinatowns at one point in the 1800s, and they were almost all burned down, Chinese men murdered, mostly men, because they were not allowed many times to bring their wives over, their families over. So there was quite a lot of terrible violence that we've endured that, you know, I've gone and looked and researched about it and talked about it. And, you know, to me, it's really knowing it's a comfort actually knowing that there's a historical precedent, and that when we know our history, we can do something about our future.
Knowledge indeed is important. Rain, what are your thoughts? How did you cope during anti-Asian hate?
I really love what Margaret said, just like, you know, learning as much as possible about our history so that we could be the generation that brings forth healing. And it was really hard, especially earlier this year when the, you know, women were violently murdered. I couldn't move. I had to cancel my whole day. I couldn't stop crying. And, you know, I came out of it a lot more stronger for sure, and a lot more determined for sure, because I truly believe that this violence has existed for so long. We're just seeing so much more of it because you know, it's being documented so much more now, right? But what I love about what's happening and you know the birthing of a new Hollywood that I was mentioning earlier is that every community, every marginalized person is demanding their space and ownership of their story and their protagonism and their right to exist and live. And so, as unfortunate it is that it continues to happen, the more we speak out and the more we vocalize and the more we come together and fundraise and create awareness, like Margaret was saying, I think the closer we'll get. It's a long way from there, but um, I'm just grateful to know that I'm not the only one, and that there are people that I could call upon when I'm feeling my most vulnerable and when I'm feeling really scared. And that even with my cis white friends, they're willing to have the tough conversations with me. And before they really weren't. And actually, I was really angry with them for a really long time because of how I've just allowed them to treat me. And I've had to go back to them and say, let's look at the history of our friendship from when we first met. And let's really interrogate how I was treated when I was in acting school, when I was around with your family, and you know, and really start to unpack, um, you know, their part in history. And it's really unfortunate that we have to do so much work for um, not just our own community, but for the white community. Um, but but at least with my friends, they're willing to have the conversation and they're really willing to understand what awareness actually looks like and really interrogate, you know, um, their history in colonization and what their ancestors did to get to where we are today and to get to where they are today. And I think the more we do that, the more we'll have real healing conversations and action.
Beautiful, beautiful. So speaking of kind of like in the spirit of allyship, right? From our non-LGBTQ and so I'm going to bring Lois back as our MC. I guess my question as I pass it on to Lois is, as someone like Lois, who's an ally of the LGBTQ community and somebody I've really trusted over the years, in the work that I do at APIT, but also on a personal level, what could allies do to support us as Asian Americans, Asian immigrants, as LGBTQ, as for our allies? And maybe Keith, will start with you, and then Alec.
Well, first of all, I think these discussions that we're having right now is so great. We need to be vocal. We have voices, and those are our best weapons to use to fight against the hate. We can't let these things just get swept under the rug. We have to take action. Celebrating our uniqueness in our API community, talking about it and working together with other coalitions and groups to, surround ourselves with people that are willing to, not let this keep going on, because it shouldn't go on. And that's when I think, just we need to keep talking about this, because it's not going to go away. I think it's so wonderful, and I really am glad to be here with all of you today. It's so important, especially what's happening with the world today. And, we don't have to be hating each other anymore.
I think it's really just about listening and about, supporting and asking allies to look at their own biases as we look at our own biases. Like, I don't want to assume just as a queer Asian American woman that I'm good, because I know that there are things that I must be doing wrong, So looking at what's in my own heart and trying to get rid of these old ideas that I have about whatever that is, but trying to root up my own discrimination and asking allies to do the same.
Yeah, I think that we have to hold ourselves accountable. All of us. I mean, at this day and age, you can get whatever kind of business, news you want. You can get what kind of info you want, if you want it to slant right, if you want it to slant left. But a real critical thinker will educate themselves, right? I think that's what's lacking here is critical thinking, because we're getting all our news from a Facebook page. And I think what everybody has to remember is we're all on a speck of dust in the universe. All right. It's not even a speck of dust. It is so minute. We are one living organism, and that's about intersectionality, right? Now, in the body, we all have cells which help us breathe, or you're supposed to help with the lung function, you help with the heart function, and all these cells know what they're doing, right? In the whole body. And when a cell starts doing, you know what, fuck all of you, I'm not gonna do what I'm supposed to do, I'm gonna do my own fucking thing, I'm not gonna help the lungs, I'm not gonna help the heart, when it reproduces that cell, it's called cancer. That's literally what cancer is. So we have to remember that we're all part of the body of humanity. And that's scientific. That's not even spiritual or anything like that. Everything that touches you touches me. We were literally in a global pandemic. A virus, microscopic, shut down the whole world. And if a virus can do that, just a virus, what if there was like raised consciousness above everybody? If we all started acting like we're really all in this together, what if that was the virus? That we just kind of woke up and looked around and said, I'm going to die, you're going to die. Let's leave this place a better place than when we got here. That's all.
And Rain, what would you say to all of this? What should allies do?
I think our allies should really work on dismantling some archaic, colonized beliefs, systems, and structures, and really do the work, whether it's mental health, whether it's through therapy, whether it's through plant medicine, whether it's through community and reaching out and talking to, your friends who are in those communities, and really break it down so that when you dismantle all the things that have been put upon you or on them by society, what else is there? Like, truly, what else is there if you take away all of those beliefs and ideas and systemic structures? And you know what? I think that what you'll find is love and light, and take that and start repurposing your body and your mind and your existence. Dismantling and repurposing.
I really like that idea. Transformation comes from dismantling, because we have to dismantle these structures you've all talked about all evening, and think about what else we can do. So thank you for that. I think for all the allies out there, we need to do a lot of our own work. So I heard that that you've all said this. The same is true in anti-racism, anti-Black racism. The expectation is not on the people whose structures are the ones that are being oppressed, that they shouldn't be the ones to have to teach you how to do things. So for all the allies out there, go read a book, go listen to some of these videos. They're very informative. There's a question out there that asks from an anonymous attendee, how would you encourage the younger generation to get tested for HIV and continue to work in fighting the stigma related to, I guess, HIV testing? So let me ask Keith first. What do you think?
Definitely, it's definitely worth getting tested. I mean, for one, there's just so much treatments out there for HIV once you get it, and also you just don't want to pass it along, because when I found out I was positive, I was devastated, but I had no idea who gave it to me. And it would be worse if I turned around and passed it on to somebody else, knowing that I had it and now putting that onto somebody else. It changed my life being positive. I mean, but there were some things about it that forced me to be out, forced me to be active in our community, and forced me to be vocal about, when I was participating in ACT UP demonstrations. We fought to get better health care and equality. And, I'm so glad that all those years of being out there in the streets with ACT UP paid off. It took a long time, but, and we still got a lot of work to do. But, so as far as getting tested, and like the postcard says, love yourself enough to get tested so you can do something about it and take care of your health.
Thank you for that, Keith, because, revisiting the history of activism is really important too. So it's not just about the oppressive histories, but also the activism that has happened through time that has really led us to this moment. Does anybody else want to answer that? Advice for young people that they should go get HIV tested, Margaret?
Well, I think gay rights really had so much growth around the AIDS epidemic. We really understood activism and what we could do because we needed to, because we were dying. And I think before AIDS, the queer community was really we had a lot of separation. We had a lot of separation between the trans community and the lesbians and the gay men, and we just sort of separated ourselves so far apart that we weren't united. I feel like the disease really united us. And if anything, if we know about pride and what pride really means, for me, pride is really all about all of those years of AIDS activism and ACT UP and Queer Nation and all of those marches and sit-ins and kiss-ins and resistance. And so, I feel like people really appreciate pride. So part of pride is really knowing your status, knowing what you're working with. And it's really important. Although, there's so much to be grateful for. I mean, we have PrEP, which I think is really an incredible innovation in science and, something that we kind of take for granted, but really it's really so much more than that. But if you know your history, your pride, you got to get tested.
Thanks for that. We have a whole bunch of questions coming in now about, I'll bundle a couple of these. The audience would like some suggestions from all of you about stories to read, movies to watch, music to listen to that exemplify the queer API story. Sort of what are the things that you're thinking about reading that really exemplify what you think people should be looking at? Alec?
I'll go first. Everybody, Cast by Isabel Wilkerson, Caste, is a perfect example of required reading for everybody who wants to be educated about race in America. It's just really about the caste system that, was at the inauguration of this country. It's been set up this way, and all of a sudden we have to really examine that in our everyday lives. And it's just an extraordinary book. And you'll read through it. She's such a great writer. You'll read through it in 2 days, I swear. There is a movie on Netflix that I am obsessed with, and it's called Your Name Engraved Herein. And it's two boys in love in Taiwan in the 80s. And it is the #1 box office movie in Taiwan right now because all the teenage girls, because the two guys in it are so gorgeous. This is like a Brooke Shields movie from the 80s. If anybody's old enough to remember one of those, watch Your Name Engraved Herein. I'm obsessed. They're so cute.
Rain, do you have any suggestions about movies people should be watching besides your movie, of course?
Everybody watch Razor Tongue. Disclosure, which is on Netflix. It's a documentary about the history of trans and queer representation. Definitely a must watch, and you can, in one documentary, get the gravity of why representation is so important. Whipping Girl by Julia Serrano is a great book and kind of gave me the language around feminism and trans misogyny, and just really empowered me and gave me the language to speak on behalf of my community and the different kinds of oppression and discrimination that queer and trans folk face. Julia Serrano eloquently just gets everybody together in one book. So I'd recommend those two things.
Margaret, let me ask you another question, because there's a bunch of questions here.
Okay.
So there are a bunch of questions about comedians. So I'll start with you and I'll go to Alec about, one, how do you do comedy that's funny, but also kind of politically incorrect? Why do comedians have trouble with Asian hate? Is it difficult to talk to other comedians about Asian hate? What do you think?
I don't know. I mean, I think that it's just really about attention, and it's really about that Asian Americans and Asian hate is really kind of one of those arenas where racism is somehow permissible in comedy settings. And, you know, we have a long history of that in cinema. If you look at Breakfast at Tiffany's or films like 16 Candles, it's just something that's embedded in some of the most important films in our history, in film history. So, you know, it's really just because it's just this false thing that was really baked into our being, and we need to rid ourselves of that. And I think that what's really important is that cancel culture actually comes from a place of, let's try to equalize language. Let's like not bias our language anymore. Let's actually know what we're saying when we're saying it. And people take offense at that. Like, we can't say anything, we can't do anything. That's not true. It's just really about intention. So, I mean, I think that it's really like just important to be comedian and be political and be out there telling your story. And, you know, there are ways to do it. It's really just about intention.
Alec, what do you say to it's by Gabriel Reyes? How do you balance between comedy and not politically correct and this idea that comedians are finding it difficult to talk about Asian hate?
You know, that's part of my comedic voice. It's kind of like I know that in my experience as a comedian, the biggest bombings I've ever done, the most I've ever bombed where the audience really hate me was, you know, if I ever punched down. Do you know what I mean? If I ever kind of like made fun of somebody who was more vulnerable than me, that wasn't cool. And I can own that now. But my brand of humor is I'm the fool and the egg is on my face. Do you know what I mean? And that's really, I kind of like aim it all on me. So I try not to, I'm the asshole in all of my stories. But I think what Margaret said is right. I think funny is funny, but the intention behind it is what is important. Don Rickles could go out and do 2 hours of racist material nonstop, and the only reason he got away with it was because he didn't feel that way. He was in the Navy, he was in the Philippines, he had a diverse crew working in show business. It's like the intention was not malevolent. Does that make sense? Yeah.
Yes, it does. And it makes the world that we're thinking about as this audience talks to us a little more complicated. Let me ask a couple more questions. So there's a few questions here about how do you keep going? What kept you going? How does the media empower you? Those kinds of things. So let's kind of maybe end this conversation.
That's like
around
10 different questions.
let's let's talk about
Yeah,
how
let's
does
answer all of those, Margaret.
we could try to type stuff in later, but
Wait, I have to go to the bathroom and I have to make rice. I'll be right back. But you answer. I'll be right back.
she'll be right back. So how does media being in the entertainment industry empower you? Maybe I can reword it that way. Let me start with Rain.
How does being in the media empower me?
Yes, the entertainment, being in media, the stuff, the work that you do, how does it empower you to keep going when times, especially when times are tough?
Oh gosh. Well, let's see. Well, this is going to be a little controversial, but being in the media and entertainment is the most disempowering feeling, position to be in, I think.
It's like being an ice skater in hell.
Yes. Yes. It's very disempowering as an actor, and as, you know, a writer and producer, because you don't have any control of anything really. And I think what makes me feel empowered is knowing that there's a need for my storytelling and there is a need for my talent. And what empowers me is when I am in the media, or when someone watches Razor Tongue or Brian's or any of the shows that I was in, Transparent, the messages that I get from my community, of love and light and of being seen, basically, makes me want to keep going. But also, like, my students, my kids, I teach an acting class, and it's all queer, all trans, and just knowing that I created a space for them to feel safe enough to do the work and safe enough to really dig deep and find their true potential, empowers me, because I didn't have that growing up. And it makes me feel like that I'm doing something. And I think, you know, this past year I've thought a lot about my mortality and you know, my vulnerability, and
Yes.
I'm very, very grateful that part of my legacy is that I've created space for a younger generation to tap into their talent, and that they can act, that they can write their stories, they can produce, and they can do exactly what I'm doing, because I am just like them. I really am just like them, just maybe just a few years ahead.
I think actually that's a really great way for us to maybe close this up, because I'm sorry we're run out of time. This has been a